In this episode, titled The Secret Weight of Monthly Expenses, we gently explore the quiet, often unnoticed rhythm of the costs that shape our daily lives. Here, in the soft stillness of the evening, we slow down enough to listen to the subtle story behind each bill, each routine payment, each small choice that quietly gathers into something we feel but rarely name. Tonight, let your mind settle as we drift through the familiar landscape of monthly obligations. Not with worry, but with calm curiosity. We will move gently through the slow rise of small habits, the emotional echoes hidden in old payments, and the quiet truths behind the expenses that anchor our lives. Nothing here rushes. Nothing here demands. Everything unfolds at the soft pace of a bedtime story. So, allow your breathing to fall into a steady rhythm. Feel the weight of the day begin to loosen, one quiet moment at a time. And let this story guide you toward a gentler understanding of the financial patterns that live beside you every month. Now, let us begin. The secret weight of monthly expenses. There is a certain silence that settles over a home when the evening arrives. Not the silence of emptiness, but the calm weight of routine. In that silence, the monthly expenses sit quietly, almost invisible, yet always present. They are not loud, nor do they rush in with urgency. Instead, they linger like a faint pressure just beneath awareness, familiar and constant. This story begins with Thomas, a man who lived an ordinary life in an ordinary apartment on the edge of the city. Each month, he watched the same numbers appear on his banking app. Rent, utilities, insurance, transportation, groceries, unexpected fees that no one ever planned for. None of them were catastrophic. None of them were dramatic. They were simply there, small currents in a river that never stopped flowing. Most nights, Thomas sat at his small wooden table, tracing the outlines of his routine. The table had become a kind of silent companion, holding his stacks of receipts, envelopes, and printed statements. He often wondered how something so small, a simple list of bills, could shape the entire rhythm of his life. But he never rushed to solve it. He simply acknowledged it, like someone turning their face gently toward a familiar wind. There was a quiet heaviness to it, not painful but persistent. The kind of weight you don't notice at first, because it grows in tiny increments. One subscription added, one service fee forgotten, one interest charge unnoticed, a coffee run becoming a habit, a small upgrade becoming a routine, and the river continued. Thomas often thought about the history of money, how ancient traders carried heavy coins, how kingdoms issued early taxes, how families across centuries kept ledgers by candlelight. He imagined himself as part of that long story, another human trying to understand the slow, steady pull of financial obligation, and somehow imagining that made the burden feel less personal, more universal, a shared human weight. His evenings were always slow. He moved from room to room without hurry, letting the dim yellow lights soften the edges of everything. On nights like these, he noticed patterns others might ignore, how the air felt slightly cooler after sunset, how the hum of the refrigerator formed a soft backdrop, how the ticking of the clock on the wall aligned with his breathing. The bills waited for him on the table, but they were patient companions. And in the quiet, he began to sense that they carried a story, not a sharp, stressful narrative, but a slow unfolding of how he had arrived here, step by step, month by month. Managing money, he realized, was never about dramatic decisions. It was about noticing the little things that accumulated, the silent details that shaped the bigger picture. It was a soft discipline, one that grew stronger every time he paused long enough to observe. And on that night, as he prepared to begin the month's review, he felt a gentleness in the process, a feeling that perhaps the weight of monthly expenses held lessons hidden beneath their numbers. Not warnings, not crises, but quiet truths waiting to be heard. Reflection. Sometimes the heaviest burdens grow slowly, one unnoticed moment at a time. By seeing them clearly, we begin to lighten them. Thomas's habit was simple. Once a month, he brewed a cup of warm chamomile tea, placed it near the window, and opened the notebook where he tracked his finances. The pages carried faint impressions of past months, erasures, scribbled arrows, reorganized columns. His handwriting was slow and deliberate, mirroring the way he approached life. This month, he noticed something subtle. The expenses hadn't spiked dramatically. Nothing shocking had appeared, but the totals felt slightly heavier, the way a backpack gains weight after adding small items over time. There was the streaming service he barely used, a food delivery membership he had forgotten to cancel, a higher-than-expected electricity bill from a few weeks of running the heater longer than usual, a handful of automatic renewals he hadn't truly noticed. Individually, each one seemed harmless. Together, they formed a pattern, quiet, steady, and persistent. Thomas leaned back in his chair, letting the soft evening breeze brush across his face. He thought about how many people live this way, not because of extravagance, but because of small habits that settled into routine without questioning. He imagined families across the world opening their own statements, noticing the same small shifts. He thought of the history of personal expenses, how in older times people exchanged labor for food, how modern households shifted toward subscriptions and automated payments, how convenience often disguised itself as necessity. There was comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. The slow accumulation of small things was a shared human experience. He took a slow sip of tea before turning back to the notebook. Instead of reacting with frustration, he treated each expense like a quiet guest at his table. He examined them gently, asking simple questions. Do I still need this? Does this bring value to my life? Is this something I chose, or something that chose me? One by one, the answers emerged. Not rushed, not forced, simply noticed. He cancelled a service. He adjusted another. He marked a plan to reduce a minor habit. Each tiny action felt like removing a small stone from a growing pile. What surprised him was not the amount saved, but the feeling that came with it. A soft relief, like tidying a room or cleaning a dusty shelf. Clarity had a calming effect. But beneath all this, Thomas sensed something deeper. Monthly expenses were not just numbers. They were reflections of choices, habits, and unspoken emotions. His spending showed where he sought comfort, convenience, distraction, routine. It revealed his patterns more honestly than his thoughts ever could. And in recognizing this, he felt a small shift inside, a gentle awareness that the weight he carried wasn't just financial. It was emotional as well. The quiet work of sorting through the month wasn't a task of fear or pressure. It was an act of understanding, of seeing himself clearly through the lens of his habits. The numbers didn't judge him. They simply reflected him. Reflection. Small habits silently shape the weight we carry. Seeing them with calm awareness allows change to begin. As Thomas continued reviewing his expenses, he noticed a particular line that always left a faint echo in his chest. It wasn't the rent, nor the utilities, nor the small comforts he purchased occasionally. It was the monthly payment for an old loan he had taken years ago. The loan itself was not unreasonable. It wasn't large enough to be catastrophic. But it was tied to a period in his life that had been financially unstable. Months when he struggled to balance everything, when each dollar felt stretched thin. And so, every payment carried a quiet, emotional residue. He traced the numbers slowly with his fingertip. The debt was nearly gone, but the feeling behind it lingered like the last note of a long-forgotten song. Thomas had learned long ago that money was never just money. It carried stories, memories, mistakes, hopes, and fears. Expenses were not merely transactions. They were emotional footprints. He remembered reading once about how financial stress activated the same parts of the brain associated with physical danger. Even small obligations could leave a subtle tension in the body, like a quiet hum beneath awareness. Tonight, he allowed himself to feel it without judgment. The room around him remained gentle, the lamp casting a soft glow, the distant hum of passing cars, the warm cup of tea cooling slowly beside him. Nothing rushed him. Nothing demanded from him. There was only the quiet honesty of looking at his financial past. In that stillness, he noticed something unexpected. The burden felt lighter now than it had before. Not because he had paid more of the loan, but because he had changed. He no longer saw debt as a sign of failure, but as a chapter of his story, one that had taught him resilience, patience, and humility. He imagined the financial lives of people across generations. Farmers borrowing grain for the winter, merchants taking credit to restock goods, young families stretching budgets during difficult times. Debt had always been a human companion, sometimes heavy, sometimes helpful. Seeing it as part of a larger human narrative removed the sting. He marked the loan payment in his notebook, wrote "almost done," and let the page rest open for a moment. The lingering emotion softened into something gentler. Gratitude that he had made it through that chapter, even when he doubted he would. When he closed the notebook, he realized something. The weight of monthly expenses wasn't solely about numbers or totals. It was about the emotional history tied to each entry. And understanding that history allowed him to move forward with more calm. Reflection. Money carries stories. By acknowledging them softly, we release the tensions we didn't know we were holding. There are expenses that invite reflection, and there are expenses that simply exist, constants woven into the structure of life. As Thomas entered the second half of his review, he moved into this territory, the necessary costs: rent, electricity, water, groceries, insurance, transportation. These were not mistakes or overlooked habits. They were the foundations of living. And yet, even foundations carry subtle weight. Thomas flipped to a fresh page in the notebook and began listing each essential expense. He wrote them slowly, leaving space between every line, as though giving each cost room to breathe. There was a strange comfort in seeing them laid out this way, separated, organized, clearly defined. The monthly totals didn't change. The responsibilities remained the same, but something felt different. He remembered a passage he once read about ancient households, how families carefully rationed grain and stored oil in clay jars. Managing essentials had always been part of human survival. It was never meant to be effortless, but it could be approached with steadiness and acceptance. As he studied the list, Thomas realized that much of the stress around necessary expenses came not from the costs themselves, but from resisting them, from wishing they were lower, from comparing them to others, from imagining a life where bills didn't exist. And so, he did something unusual. He wrote a short sentence beside each one, acknowledging its purpose. Rent, for shelter and safety. Electricity, for warmth and light. Water, for health and life. Groceries, for nourishment. Insurance, for protection. Transportation, for movement and opportunity. It felt almost ceremonial, as though he were honoring the quiet roles these expenses played in his life. The simple act of acknowledgement shifted his perspective. The costs remained the same, but the emotional weight behind them softened. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quietness of the room settle around him. The apartment was modest, but it held warmth, safety, and familiarity. The expenses that maintained it were not enemies. They were partnerships. In that stillness, Thomas sensed a deeper truth. Life's essential costs were not burdens to resent, but anchors that grounded him. They provided structure, stability, and continuity. They were evidence that he had a place in the world, a home, a routine, a life supported by systems he could trust. The weight they carried was not heavy, but steady, predictable, manageable, a quiet rhythm he could move with, rather than fight against. He closed the notebook gently, allowing the calm understanding to settle fully. Reflection. Essential expenses shape the foundation of life. Accepting them with gratitude softens their weight. With the essentials reviewed, Thomas turned to a different category, one that lived between necessity and choice. The flexible expenses, the costs that adapted with mood, convenience, or subtle habits. Dining out, small entertainment purchases, comfort items, transportation extras, digital subscriptions beyond the essentials. These were not inherently excessive, but they formed a rhythm that changed month to month, and because they shifted quietly, they were the easiest to overlook. Thomas flipped back through his previous months and noticed familiar patterns. A slight increase during colder months, a dip during quieter weeks, a spike during stressful periods when he sought comfort in small indulgences. He did not judge these patterns. He simply traced them with the same calm attention he gave everything else. He remembered a study he once encountered explaining how emotional states influenced spending behaviors. People often sought convenience when tired, comfort when overwhelmed, and small pleasures when carrying invisible stress. It made sense. Money flowed in harmony with emotions. So Thomas decided to approach this category not with restraint, but with awareness. He wrote a question at the top of the page. What do these expenses reflect about my life this month? The answers appeared gradually. The extra meals delivered during colder nights showed he had been seeking warmth and ease. The additional train rides instead of walking reflected exhaustion after long work days. The entertainment purchases revealed a need for gentle distraction when life felt monotonous. Every cost revealed a state of mind. Thomas realized something important. Unlike fixed expenses, flexible expenses offered space for gentle adjustment. Not strict budgeting, not harsh restriction, but slow realignment. He didn't seek perfection. He simply wanted clarity. He circled a few entries he could reduce the following month. Not out of guilt, but out of understanding. A subscription he barely used. A convenience fee he could avoid with a little planning. A purchase he made out of habit rather than intention. Each small change felt like tuning an instrument, adjusting the rhythm of his financial life one quiet note at a time. As he made these small decisions, Thomas felt the subtle shift again. The same sense of calm and clarity that had followed earlier insights. Finances, he realized, were not rigid structures, but gentle rhythms that could be shaped thoughtfully. The weight of expenses was never meant to be carried with tension. It could be approached softly, with patience and understanding. Thomas closed the notebook once more. He felt lighter, not because of how much he would save, but because he understood the deeper story behind each choice. Reflection. Our flexible expenses reveal our inner weather. With awareness, we can gently guide the rhythm back into balance. The night had grown quieter as Thomas reached the final part of his review. The room was dim, the tea nearly finished, and the city outside settling into its late evening hush. He looked at the totals one last time. Then he looked at the emotions that had surfaced across the process. The memories, the gratitude, the old fears that softened into understanding. It became clear now. The true weight of monthly expenses was not financial. Not entirely. It was the weight of unnoticed patterns, the weight of emotional residue tied to past chapters, the weight of unexamined choices, the weight of resisting what was necessary, the weight of habits formed quietly over time, the weight of not seeing the full picture. And all of it, when approached calmly, became lighter. Thomas realized that the monthly review was not an accounting ritual. It was a moment of self-reflection, a chance to see how he had lived, not through thoughts or memories, but through the tangible traces of his financial rhythm. His expenses reflected, his values, his stresses, his comforts, his hopes, his fears, his growth. Each number whispered a part of his story. He felt grateful for the slow routine he had chosen, for the quiet evenings with tea, for the notebook that held years of progress, for the gentle pace that allowed him to truly see himself. He understood now why so many people felt overwhelmed by their monthly expenses. It wasn't the money itself. It was the hidden emotional weight behind it. But when approached with softness, patience, and understanding, the weight transformed. It became guidance rather than pressure, insight instead of stress, clarity instead of confusion. He closed the notebook one final time, letting his fingers rest on the cover. His breathing slowed. His mind softened. The night grew still around him. He whispered a small sentence to himself. Not a promise, not a declaration, just a gentle recognition. I understand this weight now. And understanding made everything lighter. Reflection. When we see the story behind our expenses, we reclaim the quiet power to shape our financial life with calm intention. And so, as the night settles into its deepest quiet, the weight of your monthly expenses feels a little less heavy, a little more familiar, and perhaps even a little kinder. In understanding them gently, you understand yourself, your habits, your needs, your journey, as they unfold one calm month at a time. Rest now, knowing that clarity grows slowly, and peace often begins in small, unnoticed places. Good night.